Good day, grade 9s. Welcome once again to today's lesson. For natural sciences, we are still continuing with term 1. Right, the knowledge area for this term is still life and living, and this section contributes 80 marks towards your mid-year exam, so please pay attention and take advantage of the marks because they are relatively easy to get. The topic for today's lesson is human reproduction, and the subtopic is stages of reproduction. My name is Kwanele Dlamini, and this lesson was proudly brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education. So without any waste of time, let's get right into our lesson. Shall we begin? Right, so what's the point of this lesson? What are we trying to achieve and why are we doing this? We are trying to ensure that by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the processes from ovulation all the way to the creation of a fetus. You should be able to explain why the walls of the uterus thicken at a certain time of the menstruation cycle. And you should be able to describe the role of the placenta. And you should be able to describe what happens during pregnancy. You should also be able to discuss the use of condoms as contraceptives and measures to prevent the spread of STDs. For more information on this, you can refer to the grade 9 CAPS document on page 60. Shall we proceed? Right. So now let's take a step back and revisit some of the concepts that we've learned in previous grades because they lay a foundation for today's lesson. So in grade 7, we learned about human reproduction. But what is human reproduction? Human reproduction is a process by which gametes fuse. And by gametes, we are referring to the male and the female sex cells coming together. They fuse in order for the continuation of a species, okay, for fertilization so that they can continue the species. Right, so we know that in order for this to happen, we need a male and a female with healthy reproductive organs, right? And that's basically where I'm going to leave it for the grade 7 content. Now, in grade 9, a couple of weeks ago, we learned about purpose and puberty. I'm not sure if you still remember that. And we said that puberty is a stage in the human life cycle where the reproductive organs mature for reproduction. So the body is preparing itself for reproduction. And this is accompanied by many changes that occurs physically and emotionally in our bodies, right? But there is a gland that initiates puberty, and can anyone remind me which gland that is? Yes, that is the pituitary gland. So amongst the changes that occurs in the bodies are the appearance of pimples. Then you can have underarm hair, pubic hair, and the appearance of acne, and the appearance of the first period or menstruation in females, and in males you will have the appearance of facial hair. Now this is not limited to the things that I just mentioned, but I'm just using it to remind you of what we've learned already. Right, and there is a term that we use to call all of these things together as a collective. What is that term? They are the secondary sexual characteristics. Okay. Then, in our previous lesson, we learned about the reproductive organs. We looked at the male reproductive organs and we looked at the female reproductive organs. So let's quickly brush through that while we still remember. We said that the reproductive organs of the male include the penis, the urethra, the vas deferens or the sperm duct. And we have the testes, maybe your scrotum as well. And that's basically all the most important parts of the male reproductive system, okay? Then we also looked at the female reproductive system. And we said there we have the vagina, we have the uterus, we have the ovaries, and we have the fallopian tubes, okay? But what is the other name for fallopian tubes? They are called oviducts, okay? So that is what we learned in our previous lesson in a nutshell. So let's continue and do our baseline assessment. Right. But before we continue, I would like to remind you that if you have a question for us and you need clarity on something, you can send your question through to our WhatsApp line, which is 082 760 2630. That's 082 760 2630. Now let's quickly do our baseline assessment. The first question says, what are hormones? Second question, which gland tells the ovaries to release estrogen? And lastly, why is reproduction important? So you have 3 minutes to work on these 3 simple questions, and your time begins now. All right, learners, welcome back. I hope you were able to answer these 3 simple questions. So now, without any waste of time, let's just begin with the first one. What are hormones? Anyone? Yes, that is correct. Hormones are chemicals that are produced by glands which speed up or slow down activities of an organ. Okay? So which gland tells the ovaries to release estrogen? Yes, that is the pituitary gland. Why is reproduction important? Because it ensures the continuation of a species. When people reproduce, then the species will be maintained. Right. Let us continue. I hope you were able to get these questions correctly, and if you did not, I hope you were able to see where you made your mistakes. Let us continue. Now let's define a couple of terms that we are going to use in the lesson so that we don't need to consult the textbook glossary for definitions. Okay. The first term we're going to define is ovulation. Ovulation is the release of a ripe egg from the ovary. Copulation is the process where the erect penis is placed in the vagina of a female, and it's also known as a sexual intercourse. Menstruation is the breakdown of the lining of the uterus containing many blood vessels. Ejaculation is the release of sperms from the penis to the female's vagina. Implantation is when the embryo sinks into the lining of the uterus that contains many blood vessels. A zygote is a fertilized egg. The fetus is the human embryo after 8 weeks of development. The placenta is a structure that provides the embryo with food, water, and oxygen, and it also removes waste materials. Contraception is a method to prevent fertilization or birth control. Now let's talk about the stages of reproduction. Now reproduction occurs in certain stages, right? There are various stages that occurs in the process of reproduction. Okay, right, so the very first stage, which is important for reproduction to take place, is ovulation. Ovulation is the release of a ripe egg from one of the ovaries of a female. Okay, so the ovaries, only one can release an egg at a time. They don't produce eggs at the same time, and they don't release eggs at the same time. Only one can have an egg that will be released at a time. Right. Menstruation is the breakdown of the lining of the uterus that contains many blood vessels. Copulation is the process where an erect penis is placed in the vagina. So that is the third stage. The fourth stage is fertilization, which is the process where sperms or sperm cell fuses with an egg cell. And then we have implantation, which is stage number 5. That is when the fertilized egg sinks into the walls of the uterus. Then the whole process from fertilization to implantation and beyond is known as pregnancy. This is when the fertilized egg grows and develops for a period of 40 weeks. Right. So the seventh one will be the placenta, which is when there is a placenta that provides food to the growing baby. Then the last one is pregnancy, which is the period between fertilization and the birth of a baby. Right. So let's begin with ovulation. What is ovulation? So each month, a new egg starts to mature in one of the ovaries, right? Remember we said the ovaries produce what? They produce eggs, right? So each month, a new egg will start to mature. It will become ripe, and as it gets ripe, the ovary will then release this egg during a process called what? Ovulation. So during ovulation, a ripe egg is released from one of the ovaries. Where is it released to? It's released into the fallopian tubes. The egg is released into the oviduct or fallopian tubes where fertilization usually takes place. Right. So fertilization usually occurs in the fallopian tubes when there is a ripe egg present there. Right. If there is no ripe egg in the fallopian tubes, then fertilization may not occur. Right. So females are most likely to fall pregnant during this stage. What stage is this? This is ovulation, when there is a ripe egg that is being released from the ovaries into the oviduct or the fallopian tubes. Now, there is another concept which is known as the fertile period. Now, ovulation and the fertile period can sometimes be confusing. So let's bring a clear distinction between the two. We said ovulation is when a ripe egg is released from one of the ovaries, right? But the fertile period is the time period where a female is most likely to fall pregnant. Okay, so a fertile period is on the days that a woman is likely to fall pregnant during her menstrual cycle. And sperms can survive in a woman's body for 2 to 3 days. So if it happens that you are on your fertile period, maybe after ovulation or before ovulation, maybe a day before ovulation, and then there are sperms in your body, then there is a chance that those sperms, since they can survive 2 to 3 days in the body of a woman, they may fertilize that egg. Okay. But the fertile period is between day 11 up to day 16. That is the period where it is highly likely that a woman will fall pregnant should she engage in a sexual intercourse. Right. Let's continue. So this is an illustration of ovulation. You have 2 ovaries, but only one can release an egg at a time. And there we have an egg. And when this egg is matured and ripe, it is then released out of the ovaries into the fallopian tubes or the oviducts. So this egg, as you can see, it's no longer inside the ovary. It is now being released into the fallopian tubes. Why is that happening? It is in anticipation for fertilization. Okay. Right. So we have another stage, which is menstruation. Right. So menstruation normally occurs if there is no, if fertilization has not taken place, right, the woman will undergo what? A menstruation. Okay. So the soft lining of the uterus grows and develops a thick layer full of blood vessels. Right. So why does these walls of the uterus develop this thick layer full of blood? It is in preparation for fertilization, which translates to pregnancy. But if there's no fertilization that takes place, then menstruation will occur. And this is when the walls are tearing out and they come out in the form of blood. Okay. This happens in preparation for a fertilized egg. So the uterus normally grows this thick layer of blood in order to provide a shelter for a fertilized egg. So the uterus is preparing itself for a baby to grow. That's why it does this. The walls of the uterus will remain thick for at least a week after ovulation. And if the egg is not fertilized, it will pass out of the body through the vagina. And after the 28-day period, because the menstrual period or the menstrual cycle of a female is usually about 28 days. So after day 28 and there's nothing that has happened, there will be menstruation. Now menstruation is usually painful for females. Why? Because these blood vessels are pulling on the walls of the uterus as they are tearing and coming out in the form of blood out of the body. Right. Okay, so this is the egg that has been released from the ovary and it went into the oviduct and there was nothing, so it came out of the female body if there's no fertilization. But if fertilization takes place, then it cannot escape. Okay. Right, so this is another illustration showing you the things that females use for menstruation. Okay. They usually use pads and panty liners and etc. Right. So the next stage is copulation. What is copulation? Well, copulation is when the egg and the sperm are brought together during copulation. Copulation is when the female and the male come together during asexual intercourse. Right. So during copulation, the penis becomes erect because it has blood flowing through it. So it becomes erect and hard. Okay. And the female vagina becomes moist in anticipation for this intercourse. The male places his penis inside the vagina, and the motion of back and forth that occurs during copulation stimulates the release of semen from the male penis. Okay, So sperms from the testes are pumped through the sperm ducts and mixed with fluids, and then semen is ejaculated into the vagina. Okay, right. So at this stage, when copulation occurs, it stimulates the testes to release sperms and semen. Okay, so the sperms from the testes are pumped through the sperm ducts and are mixed with fluids, and then the semen is ejaculated into the vagina. Okay, so there are many sperms. There are millions of them that are usually pumped out of the testes, and they try to find their way to the egg of the female, right? But in most cases, no, actually not in most cases, there is always only one that will succeed in fertilizing the egg. So all the others are going to lose the swimming Olympics. Okay, so the penis deposits sperm during fertilization. The penis deposits sperm inside the vagina, and they swim up into the uterus and into the oviducts. Remember, we said the oviduct is where fertilization usually takes place. So after ejaculation, the sperms will swim all the way through, being facilitated by the many mitochondria. If you still remember from our previous lesson, we said that the sperm has a head and it has a collar which has many mitochondria and a tail. The tail facilitates the swimming, and the collar provides energy through the mitochondria, which are energy powerhouses, right? So it swims all the way to the vagina and through to the what? The oviduct, where it is anticipating to find an egg to fertilize. But many of these sperms don't actually survive this trip. Okay, they don't make it to fertilizing the egg, because only one gets successful out of these millions. So if there is an egg in the oviduct, only one sperm will fertilize it. Can you imagine these millions and millions of sperms shooting out to go and attack one egg, and then only one is successful and all the others have wasted their efforts? It's unfair. The egg is fertilized and a zygote is formed. A zygote is the fertilized egg, and it's formed after the sperm and the ovum or the egg have come together during what? Fertilization to form a zygote. If there is no egg in the oviduct, fertilization will not occur. So fertilization only occurs if there is a ripe egg in the oviduct. If the egg is not there, then there won't be any fertilization, because the sperm will be just shooting to get there and only to find nothing. So it will be wasting its efforts. Okay, so this is basically how the one sperm out of the many sperms that go into the oviduct is the only one to succeed. Okay, so this is the egg, and this is the only sperm, by the look of things, is the only sperm that's winning these Olympics. Okay. Now the next stage is known as implantation. Right. So during implantation, you have the fertilized egg growing and forming a ball of cells, and it moves from the oviduct and sinks into the walls of the uterus. So at this point, we refer to this ball of cells as an embryo. Okay, this is usually during the first 8 weeks after fertilization. We refer to the ball of cells as an embryo. Okay, the first 2 months. 8 weeks is equivalent to 2 months. Okay, so this stage is known as implantation. Right, as you can see from the illustration, we have a fertilized egg, because fertilization occurs where? It occurs in the fallopian tubes or the oviduct. It then sinks and moves down to the uterus, right? It moved all the way from there. As you can see, it's moving. There it is. It's moving, and it's gonna land there, right? Right. So it lands on the walls of the uterus. This process is called what? implantation. Okay. Right, so this is a clearer picture that shows how this motion takes place. So we said that fertilization occurs where, okay, first thing, the egg is released during ovulation and it goes into the oviduct. So the egg was there initially, and as it matured, it was released into the oviduct. Then a sperm will come from here all the way, from the vagina all the way to the oviduct, and fertilization will take place. As you can see here, it's like a zoomed version of the illustration where you have one sperm fertilizing the egg, and then it starts to move and divides. Okay, there's cell division taking place. You have one cell, then two cells, then you have four, and many cells as it moves down the oviduct. Then eventually it finds its way to the walls of the uterus where it sinks. Okay, so the uterus provides a shelter for the baby to grow. So it's no surprise that the fertilized egg sinks into the walls of the uterus. Now, I would like to remind you that if you have questions for us, you can send them through to our WhatsApp line, which is 082 760 2630. That's 082 760 2630. Right. Now let's talk about the placenta. So after 2 months of growth, the baby is now referred to as a fetus. So for the first 8 weeks or the first 2 months, we call it an embryo, and then after 8 weeks or after 2 months, it is now called a fetus. So as the fetus grows, it is attached to the uterus walls by the placenta. Okay, so the placenta is an organ that provides the baby with food, oxygen, and water from the mother's blood. Okay, and it also removes waste such as carbon dioxide from the fetus. Remember, the baby or the fetus is growing and it's made up of cells. And what did we say about cells? We said cells undergo cellular respiration. And what is the byproduct of cellular respiration? It is carbon dioxide. So it only makes sense that you get carbon dioxide coming from the fetus, right? So the placenta removes this carbon dioxide from the fetus. Okay. And it provides it with oxygen, food, and water. Then we have something called the umbilical cord, which joins the fetus to the placenta. So the placenta is an organ, I will show you in a second, and it is connected to the fetus through an umbilical cord. Right. So it carries blood between the mother and the fetus. This is the umbilical cord. It connects the two to each other. Okay? And it carries blood between the mother and the fetus. So if the mother happens to drink alcohol, guess what's going to happen? The baby is also going to get that alcohol. And if the mother smokes, the baby will also get to smoke as well. So it's advisable to stay away from alcohol, cigarettes, and all kinds of drugs during pregnancy. Okay? Because this can have really bad effects on the baby. You don't want to have a baby that has health issues because of your irresponsibilities. Okay, right. So this is the placenta and the umbilical cord. The placenta is this organ here at the top. So this is inside the uterus. This is the uterus of the woman, and we have the placenta up there at the top. And the umbilical cord is connected to the placenta all the way to the belly button of the baby. Right. So this is the cord that joins the placenta to the baby. And it transports blood between the baby and the mother. Okay? Right. So here is a better view. We said this is the placenta. And this is the umbilical cord. Okay. And we said, what is the role of these two things? They provide the baby with food, oxygen, and water, and they take away what? Carbon dioxide from the baby. Okay? Right. Now let's talk about pregnancy. Pregnancy means that a woman is carrying a growing baby or a developing baby inside her uterus. The entire process from the point where fertilization takes place all the way towards the time when a woman gives birth. That is called pregnancy. It is usually a 40-month long period or 9 months. Okay, this is the period between fertilization up until the baby is born, right? It is also known as gestation, right? Now don't confuse gestation with a gas station, okay? Gestation means pregnancy, and a gas station is where you find fuel for your car, okay? Right, so gestation or pregnancy lasts about 40 weeks in humans, okay? In other animals, it has different durations, but in humans, it is strictly 40 weeks. Now, you may have other circumstances where you find out that maybe a baby is born in 7 months, okay? But that is not very common, okay? So those are the only exceptions. You may find someone having a baby at 7 months. Sometimes it may be 6, right? And then they put that baby in an incubator because it is not ready to survive on its own outside of the mother's body, right? So the layer of the uterus thickened with blood vessels that we talked about earlier is maintained, and the woman does not have a menstruation period while pregnant, right? So pregnant women are exempt from having a period or menstruation. They don't bleed, they don't undergo menstruation. Why? Because the layer of the uterus will remain thick for the duration of the entire pregnancy. Why? Because it is providing shelter for the baby to grow. Okay. Right. And this is basically how pregnant women sometimes will look like. Okay. The belly will be inflated to show that there is a baby growing inside. Right. Now let's talk about contraception or contraceptives. Contra means to be against something, and conception means fertilization. Now the two combined will mean prevention of pregnancy, or what is known as birth control. Contraceptives are used to prevent unwanted pregnancies. Now, some people may not be in a position to want to have children for many different reasons, and contraceptives are like their best option to ensure that they don't get unwanted babies. A condom is an example of a contraceptive, okay? So people make use of condoms to prevent pregnancy, right? So a condom is a rubber sheet which is rolled onto the erect penis before having sex, okay? It's a rubber sheet that is rolled onto the erect penis before a sexual intercourse. But why would we roll this rubber sheet before an intercourse? It is because it acts as a barrier and stops the sperms from flowing out of the penis and entering the female vagina. Because if that happens, then there is a risk of pregnancy. Okay, so we are trying by all means to prevent unwanted pregnancies. It also prevents any fluids from either of the partners from mixing. Okay, it prevents the mixing of fluids from the two partners during the sexual intercourse. So a correct usage of condoms can protect people not only from sexually transmitted diseases but also pregnancy. Right, sexually transmitted diseases are diseases that are passed from one person to the other during a sexual intercourse. Right, so they are passed from one person to the other when they have a sexual contact with someone who has an infection. Now, an example of STDs, which is very common, would be HIV, okay? But there are other forms of STDs that you may learn about in future. So an STD, some STDs are caused by bacteria or parasites. Those ones can be treated using antibiotics. And then some which are caused by viruses such as HIV, there are no cures to cure them. But however, we have medications or medicines that can help to keep the disease under control. So other contraceptive measures would include things like tablets and injections, which are normally taken by females to prevent fertilization. Okay. Right, now let's move on to our activity. Provide a definition for each word. 1, we have copulation. 2, we have implantation. 3, menstruation. 4, fertilization. 5, pregnancy. And 6, ovulation. So you have 6 minutes to work on these 6 questions. Provide definitions for each of these words. And then after 6 minutes, we are going to discuss the definitions together. Alright learners, welcome back. I hope you were able to define the 6 terms that I gave you. So without any waste of time, let's discuss the definitions together. So the first term is copulation. Copulation is when the erect penis is placed inside the vagina. Okay, I hope you were able to get that one correct. The second one is implantation. This is when the fertilized egg sinks into the walls of the uterus. The third one is menstruation, and menstruation is the breakdown of the lining of the uterus wall or having a menstruation period. Okay. The fourth one is fertilization, which is when an egg fuses with a sperm cell. The fifth one is pregnancy, which is when a woman carries a growing baby in her uterus, and this is usually for 40 weeks. The last one is ovulation. This is when the ovaries release, or the ovary release, a ripe egg cell. Okay, I hope you were able to get these ones correctly, and if you did not, I hope you were able to identify where you made mistakes, and in your tests and your exams you will do better. Okay, right, let's summarize our lesson. We said that ovulation is the release of a ripe egg from the ovary. Menstruation is the breakdown of the lining of the uterus that contains many blood vessels. Okay, and then the next one, copulation is the process where an erect penis is placed inside the vagina. This is also known as asexual intercourse. Fertilization is the process where a sperm cell fuses with an egg cell. And implantation is when the fertilized egg sinks into the uterus walls. Right, so let's try and re-explain the terms. Okay, so during ovulation we have during ovulation we have a ripe egg being released from one of the ovaries, right? And it's being released to where? It's being released into the oviduct or the fallopian tubes. Fallopian tubes and oviducts are one and the same thing, so those terms are used interchangeably to mean the same thing. Menstruation is the breakdown of the lining of the uterus walls, which contains many blood vessels. Okay, remember we said the walls of the uterus thicken in anticipation for fertilization or pregnancy, right? And should that not happen, there's going to be menstruation where the walls will tear down and come out in the form of menstruation or blood. Okay, then copulation is a sexual intercourse where an erect penis is placed inside the vagina. Okay, and after some time that will stimulate the testes to release sperms and semen, and when ejaculation takes place, then those sperms will shoot out into the female vagina and go look for an egg in the oviduct. So if there is a ripe egg, then there's going to be what? Fertilization. And fertilization is a process where the sperm cell will fuse with the egg cell. And then implantation is when this fertilized egg moves along the fallopian tubes and goes into the uterus walls, where it is now trying to find shelter during pregnancy. Okay, so I hope you understand now all of these things. Then pregnancy is the entire period from the point where fertilization takes place to the point when the baby leaves the body of the woman, or when the baby is born. Okay, and this is usually 40 weeks long. So at the same time, an organ called the placenta is made. This gives the growing fetus food. Okay, so the placenta is made once the fertilized egg has sunk into the walls of the uterus. Then you're going to have the placenta being made and an umbilical cord which connects the baby to the placenta. And we said the placenta gives the baby what? Food, water, and oxygen. And it takes away waste material from the baby. And this waste will be what? Carbon dioxide. So pregnancy is also known as gestation. So some people may want to have an intercourse, but they're not ready, or they want to prevent unwanted pregnancies. So these people will tend to opt for contraceptives, okay, in order to prevent unwanted pregnancies from taking place. Right, so a condom is a good contraceptive to prevent pregnancy, but there are other forms of contraceptive measures such as tablets that females can take, and they're usually collectible at clinics or pharmacies, and also injections, okay, to prevent pregnancy. Right, so now we're going to take time to go through your WhatsApp questions. Right, let's quickly do that. Okay, there's a question here. It says, good morning. I just wanted to ask, what happens if the gestation or pregnancy is longer than 40 weeks or less than 40 weeks? So usually when, okay, I'm going to start by explaining when it's less than 40 weeks, and then we're going to go to explaining when it's taking longer than 40 weeks. Right. So if gestation is shorter than 40 weeks, right? This usually happens when maybe the baby is born in 7 months or 6 months. It can also happen that it's below 6 months or 7 months. So usually they take the baby out of the mother. Okay, the mother gives birth, and they quickly take that baby into an incubator so that it can continue developing and grow until it is ready to survive on its own. Because usually when it's born prematurely, it is unable to breathe for itself, and it still needs the mother for support. So they put it in an incubator, and that's where it gets fed and it grows until it is ready to survive on its own. Sometimes it happens that the baby is unfortunately born before maybe the period of 6 months or 7 months, and that is a very unfortunate event, because that baby would not be able to survive. That is usually called a miscarriage, when someone loses the baby before the set time for their birth. Right. So the baby doesn't really survive if it is born prematurely. Okay. Right. Thank you for your question. Okay. The second part of your question was asking about what happens if it's taking longer than 40 weeks. So usually doctors in the hospital will stimulate your body. They will inject you with some things to stimulate something called what? Labor pains. Okay. So that your body will try and prepare itself to get the baby born. Okay, so if they see that your body is not going to labor, sometimes they induce it themselves. And then sometimes if there are problems with the baby not being in the right position to come out of the mother's womb or uterus, they do a cesarean section where they take out the baby. Okay, so they can induce the labor pains so that the baby can come out of the body, because sometimes the baby will be stubborn. They'll be like, I'm too comfortable in my mother's uterus, I don't want to come out. So they induce the labor pains so that the baby will come out. And sometimes if the baby is not sitting properly for a natural birth, they will then do a C-section and take the baby out of the uterus. Thank you so much for your question. That was the only question that we had, right? So I will just continue talking about the stages of reproduction so that I drive the point home, so that it helps you in answering tests and exam questions, right? We said that the first stage that we have is, yes, the first stage that we have is ovulation. This is when one of the ovaries release a ripe egg or a matured egg into the oviduct. And this egg will stay for about 24 hours, okay? And if there's no sperm that comes to fertilize it, that egg will leave the body through the vagina, right? And should it happen that a female will engage in sexual activity during the time when they have ovulated and there is an egg in their oviduct, then upon ejaculation, this is now assuming that they didn't. Upon ejaculation, after copulation, the sperm will shoot out and go and fertilize this egg. Then this fertilized egg will then undergo cell division and form many cells and form a zygote, and it will sink into the walls of the uterus. So for the first 8 weeks, which is 2 months, that will be called what? It will be called an embryo, okay? And then after 2 months or after 8 weeks, it then grows into something called a fetus. This is when it's undergoing cell division and forming different parts of the body, okay? It's becoming an actual human being now, right? So that period is usually 7 months, okay? Because it begins after the first 8 weeks, right? So the baby will then grow for a period of 40 weeks, right, in total. And during that time, the walls of the uterus were thickened, remember? They thicken in anticipation for pregnancy, and they will form an organ which is called a placenta. The placenta is what provides the baby with food, oxygen, and water, right, for the baby to survive. But it needs something to take this to the baby because the baby can't eat for itself, okay? So there is an umbilical cord which also forms, which connects the placenta to the belly button of the baby. So that helps to transport the food, the oxygen, and the water to the baby, okay? Where does the baby get all of this? From the mother's blood through the placenta. So the placenta is connected to the bloodstream of the mother. So whatever the mother consumes, the baby will also consume. So if the mother drinks alcohol, guess what? That baby will be exposed to that alcohol. If the mother smokes, that baby will also get that smoke. So please, if you happen to find yourself pregnant, stay away from drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes, okay? It's not going to be good for your baby. Babies are very fragile, especially when they are still inside the body. They rely on the mother to take care of herself in order for themselves to be protected and healthy, right? Then the placenta also takes care of the carbon dioxide, which comes out as a result of cellular respiration. Remember, the baby is a living organism inside of another living organism, the mother being a living organism and the baby being another living organism inside of the mother. So all living organisms have something in common, and that is what? Cells. So the baby is made up of cells, and those cells will undergo cellular respiration, and as they undergo cellular respiration, carbon dioxide is released as a byproduct, and this carbon dioxide is taken out by the umbilical cord from the baby to the placenta and to the mother's bloodstream, where it goes into her lungs and then it's released. Okay, but you will learn more about that when we do our lesson on circulation, which is our next lesson. Right, so in our next lesson, a brief preview into what's coming in our next lesson, we are going to be looking at the circulatory system. We will look at blood flow, the types of blood vessels that we have, which are veins, capillaries, and arteries. We will look at the function of the heart. We will look at the connection between the heart and the lungs, and we will look at how oxygen is taken into the body and how it diffuses into the cells, and how carbon dioxide comes out to be and how it is released out of our bodies. So you don't want to miss out on that lesson because it's going to be very interesting. We'll be looking at the circulatory system. Right. That being said, that brings us to a homework. Okay. So we have this homework. Complete the following table for the menstrual cycle. So go study the menstrual cycle and fill out this table. Okay, so you have stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. You have days 1 to 7, 7 to 13, 14 to 16, 17 to 28. I've already done stage 3 for you. The only thing you need to do is stage 1, 2, and 4. You need to explain what happens during stage 1, stage 2, and stage 4. That being said, that brings us to the end of our lesson on the stages of reproduction. I hope you learned something out of this lesson and you are now better equipped to tackle your tests and your exams. I wish you the best with that as you are preparing yourselves. Right. Now, my name is Kwanele Dlamini, and this lesson was proudly brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education. Before I close, I would like to remind you that we are still in the middle of a pandemic, so please take care of yourself, wear your mask, sanitize your hands, and keep your distance, and keep running in zigzag, and make sure you don't get sick. And make it back here next time, same place, for the next lesson on the circulatory system. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure hosting you for this lesson. Thank you.